G'day guys, and welcome to Retrospectreviews. I'm Vince, and today we're talking about what games I had on the Atari 2600 when I was a kid. Well, what prompted me to make this video? Well, I was watching the YouTubers Do Nerd, Tom and Lacey, and they were talking about the NES games they grew up with.
What's up, nerdlings?
What's up, nerdlings?
Do you nerd for the NES?
And they were inspired by another YouTuber, MegaDan29, about what games did other people grow up with.
This is an open tag to everybody. I would love to see your collections.
So I'll leave a link to those videos down below, so go and check them out and subscribe to them if you haven't already. Well, growing up, I didn't have an NES. Now, I had some friends and acquaintances of my parents that their kids had an NES. We mainly played Duck Hunt and Mario because that was the two games that came with most of the NESs at the time. And we all loved using the Zap gun with Duck Hunt. Now, the console we grew up with was the Atari 2600, the Darth Vader as we used to all call it back in the day. So when we got this, two joysticks, and it came with Space Invaders, and we also got Missile Command. That was brought separately, so we had two games to start off with. Now, looking back, I made a list of all the games me and my brother did have, or my family had. And by the end of the 80s, we had a good little collection. We had over 30 games for the Atari. Of course, that list would make this video very big. So I thought I'll just concentrate on the games that I used to play the most. Now, I don't have them all back in my collection. I do have some of them. And I would love to get some more of the ones that I used to play constantly back in my collection. Of course, the first one was me and my brother used to always play Space Invaders. It was a game that I wish I could play better back in the day. It seems so simple now, but when I was a kid, 4 or 5 or something like that, this seemed incredibly hard. My brother was really good at this. Well, I thought he was really good. I don't know if he really was or not, but yeah, it's a Space Invaders, fond memories of me and my brother and my parents sitting down trying to complete that. A lot of times they used to just love watching us play Space Invaders or whatever game we had, but they would occasionally join in. Of course, the other game we had was Missile Command. Now, that's another game I used to love playing all the time, trying to stop those missiles coming in and getting frustrated when they used to come in at a certain point at such great velocity that you could not get your trigger in place. Now, once again, being young, wasn't really super good at it, but my brother could play that game really well. The next game was another game that was a big phenomenon in the 80s, and everyone wanted it and played it in the arcade and whatever system you had at the time, but we had it on the Atari 2600, and that was Pacman. This is another game I used to play to death. I used to play this so much that my parents got me a Pacman that I could travel with. I've shown that in other videos. And the only problem with that one was you couldn't turn the volume down, so I'm sure it used to drive my parents crazy on the long drives to see family. But this is another game I used to play. I pretty much stopped playing this when we got Miss Pacman. Like I said, in the early 80s, I was obsessed with Pacman, so those two games got played the most. Another game I was absolutely obsessed with was Keystone Capers. Yes, I used to play this to death. I always wanted to beat it, but I could only get so far. Playing it now, it is such a simple game. It's amazing how I used to find this so difficult. Chasing after the criminal, jumping over gold bars and whatever else was in your way, and you had to be careful because the criminal would double back on you. But Keystone Capers was another one I used to love playing on the Atari 2600. The game that me and my mates used to play a lot of, and it was one of the games that you could play with multiple players, and that was Decathlon. We would spend hours playing this. Once again, my brother was really good at this. I think he was really good at the javelin. We used to play I think track and field at the local dry cleaners. And I think that's why we ended up with this, because my brother loved track and field, and I think this was as close as we could get to track and field at the time. I don't know if track and field was ever released for the Atari 2600, but Decathlon was, and my brother was really good at this. If you haven't played this game on a real Atari 2600, let me tell you, by the time you got finished on most of the events, you were exhausted. You had this joystick, which isn't a lot. It's one button and up, down, and you had to, really move it at a great speed and press the button at the right time. Oh boy, was that a frustrating game. But it was a game that me and my mates used to play very often. Now, one game I haven't picked up. I have got it on the ColecoVision, and that's because it came from a family friend that she sold me the ColecoVision with all the games, and that was Zaxxon. Now, I had Zaxxon on the Tandy Coco 3. Also, we had it on the Atari 2600, and that was one of my favourite games on the Atari 2600. Trying to get that ship through the mazes and shoot everything. It was a frustrating game, but it was a game that I always came back to time and time again. Another game that I used to love playing was Chopper Command. I used to love this, going down, shooting the enemy convoys and the other helicopters. So it was really good. Actually, no, you're not meant to shoot the convoy. I think you're meant to protect the convoy. So yeah, another game I used to love playing, but once again, it got to a certain point and got very frustrating for me. It seems like a simple game now, but when you're 7 or 8, it seems very complicated. A movie that I fell in love with came out, and they released the game. Mum and Dad went out and got Ghostbusters on the Atari 2600. It's pretty similar to the Ghostbusters that you get on the Commodore 64 and all the other consoles, but obviously the graphics are not as good. Same technique. You have to drive your vehicle, stack yourself up with traps and baits and whatever. But it's another game I could never finish. I never really understood how to play this properly, so maybe it's a game I need to revisit. I know I did. When I got my Commodore 64, it was called a movie pack, and it came with the Commodore 64 version of this. So one of those I should revisit and play. But this was a game I used to love playing, but it was so frustrating I just couldn't get very far on it. Of course, another game I still haven't picked up, which I really wish I could, was Pitfall. Pitfall 1 and 2. Now, my brother was really good at Pitfall. I think I used to get a little bit far, but I didn't get that far in Pitfall. But Pitfall 2, I was a little bit older, and I absolutely loved that game. I remember Mum coming home with it. I don't know why she picked up Pitfall. I don't recall her ever playing Pitfall 2 or Pitfall, but she brought home Pitfall 2, and I absolutely loved that game, and I just wanted to beat it. And I'd get so far into the game, and you couldn't save it, so you either had to leave your Atari 2600 on or start from the very beginning. So that's another game I've never completed and I'd love to revisit, but it was very frustrating. Same with the original Pitfall. I'm not sure if that's it just repeated itself and got harder and harder, but that's another game I've never finished. Another game that I used to love playing back in the day was Jungle Hunt. Jungle Hunt is a great game. It's a bit kind of like a Pitfall knockoff, where you have to travel through different screens. There was like vine swinging, there was swimming through crocodile-infested rivers, jumping over boulders, and then you had to kind of defeat the chief at the end to rescue your girlfriend who was captured by the natives. It's probably not very politically correct these days, but as Jungle Hunt was a game that I was obsessed with finishing, but I think I've completed it now, but I never did back in the day. Now, towards the end of the 80s, Of course, our original Atari Darth Vader had sadly gone to a better place, and Mum went out and brought Atari 2600 Junior, because Mum still played a couple of the games. She loved, we had Slot Machine where you played the pokies, that, and my Uncle Joe used to love playing that when Uncle Joe would come to our place. Pretty much you could say goodbye to your Atari because Uncle Joe was playing slot machine most of the night, but I didn't mind enjoying it. I enjoyed playing it as well, but yeah, so we got this Junior, and then around the same time Mum brought Rampage, another game I loved at the arcades, and begged Mum to buy this for me when she was picking up the Atari 2600 Junior. Now, when I got home, I was greatly disappointed. It in no way looked like the graphics that you got in the arcade. And I think the gameplay was a little bit different too. I don't think, and because of course you could only play 2 players. You couldn't play all 3 players like in the arcade. So Rampage is another game I used to play all the time, even though I was a little disappointed that it didn't look like the arcade. Of course, another weird game that we picked up at the Sydney markets, and that was Puyan, I think it's pronounced. Basically, you play a pig and you go up and down the side of the screen while the wolves descend down, and you got to pop on balloons, and you got to pop the balloons before they get down the bottom and climb up and eat you or eat your kids or something like that. So that was another game I loved to play and I was obsessed with. Another game I was obsessed with was Bobby Come Home. Now I've actually completed that when I was sick back probably about 87, 88. It was the easiest. The Atari 2600 Junior was the easiest thing to set up. So I just sat there one day and played Bobby Come Home. Now that just basically just played over and over and over again, and just got a bit faster as you completed each level. Another game that I loved to play was Tomcat, the F-14 flight simulator. Me and another mate, Edward, we used to play this when he used to sleep over, or I think I actually took it over to his place a couple of times, the Atari 2600, and we used to play this. He got into this way more than I did. I just liked taking off and trying to land, but he got into the whole action part, trying to shoot down the other planes. But for the time, this was a pretty good flight simulator, especially for the Atari 2600. Of course, there's a lot of other games I could rattle off here, but this video would be way too long. We used to have the double cartridge with Spike's Peak, Haunted Manor, Robin Hood. I was obsessed with Robin Hood. I just wanted to beat that. I could not. I think as far as I got was the entrance of the castle in Robin Hood. Now, looking back, me and my brother were quite lucky. I didn't realise how lucky we were with the amount of Atari 2600 games. Over 30 games that I can recall that we had on the Atari 2600. That was probably pretty rare back in the day, and no wonder all the neighbourhood kids wanted to be at our place, especially when the Atari 2600 was one of the most popular consoles at the time. My house used to be full of the neighbourhood kids trying to get a turn at the Atari 2600. Wow. So, looking back now, I'm very appreciative of how many of the games that we had, only if I appreciated it back then. Well, in the comments, let me know if you grew up with the Atari 2600 and what games that you played, or what console that you have growing up and what games you played on that. While you're there, don't forget to like and share this video, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell because I upload a new video every week. And don't forget to go and check out Do You Nerd and MegaDan29. I'll leave those links down below like I said. And that's it for this video. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. Bye.